and I'm so excited to hear Randy present it here in a minute. So we're just giving everybody a chance to get in and welcome you. John from Dubuque, and there's someone from Dublin, and Dee Dee Kirby from Amarillo. Hi, Dee Dee. Always good to see people from West Texas, my hometown, Dumas and the Panhandle, and Amarillo close by that, and Kelly from Little Elm. Just so many. So, Randy, this is one of your favorite books, I know, and Kim Scott has written several books. I think this is by far the best one, and can't wait. I want to give you all the time you can on it. If you don't have the handout, Lisa will post it in the chat, and you can draw it, you can use it, but you really need to get it printed if possible so you can follow along and write on it. So with that, Randy, welcome. Happy New Year. Really appreciate your being here with us.
Happy New Year to everyone. Mike, will you wave if you can hear me okay? All right, good. Happy New Year to everyone. I certainly know that we're thinking about the people in California right now with that raging fire that is getting closer to Pepperdine University, where I went to school for one of my degrees. And we're thinking about the people facing the winter storm. And I suspect that some of you are very active in getting ready for that winter storm. This is another book briefing. That's what I do for SGR, and that's what I do in another part of my life. And this is one of what I call a modern business book classic. It deals with something very simple, and that is, how do you encourage people to do the very best they can in a way that helps them get better? And so let's go ahead and put the formula down. It's as simple as it sounds, and yet it's not always easy to implement. You need to write this down: care personally and challenge directly. Care personally, challenge directly. That is the formula that she came up with. The name of the book, Radical Candor: Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity. But that formula is what she fleshes out in this book. And if you've got your handout printed, I want you to turn all the way to page 9. It looks like this. And so if you will turn to page 9, you will see kind of the critical pieces. So we're going to start on this page. On the right, Kim Scott has worked at upper levels in Google and Apple and been a coach to other high-level leaders. Her book is simple and direct. It is candid. It is candid. Her point is to get to the point. Quit beating around the bush. And so I want you to circle that phrase, quit beating around the bush. It's a critical phrase because people are so delicate in how they want to say things to each other. And so be candid, use radical candor. For those of you who have been on other book briefings and are keeping up with business book literature, write down just somewhere on the bottom or something the phrase psychological safety. This is a concept that was really developed by Amy Edmondson. Her book, The Right Kind of Wrong, won the Business Book of the Year by the Financial Times a year ago. And this book, Radical Candor, is really talking about how to create a place of psychological safety. So that's a critical thing to understand. And then in the middle of the night last night, this happens to me. In the middle of the night last night, I woke up thinking about doing this webinar today on Radical Candor, and I realized there's one other way to look at the formula about care personally and challenge directly, and that is to yourself. You need to yourself, care personally so that you take care of yourself. You don't lose your balance. You don't lose your energy, but then you also challenge yourself directly so that you will work on getting better at what you need to get better at. So even though the formula is especially about people that you are coaching or mentoring or leading or managing, and it can be done to peers, it can also be done to yourself. All right, on the left side of page 9, let's start here. Every manager and every team member does things worthy of praise. And also, they do things deserving of criticism. And so, worthy of praise, deserving of criticism and correction and tweaking. If you are a manager, a supervisor, a leader, learn to do both and then actually do both very, very well. The book has some seminal stories. And the first one is about Kim Scott, who is over an underperforming nice guy named Bob. And so Bob would turn work in. It was not adequate. It was not good work. And so Kim Scott would stay up late correcting his work to send it on to the next step. And so she ended up realizing that he simply was not cut out for this task. And so she scheduled I think it was a lunch meeting with him. And she said, Bob, we really like you, but the fact is we're going to have to let you go. And he was shocked. And he said, you have mistreated me because you did not tell me what I needed to do better. You did not give me the training and coaching that I needed. And she realized that that was exactly correct, that she had sort of just bundled up her frustration with him, finally realized that he couldn't cut it, but she had not given him the help to either try to cut it or to help him understand why he wasn't going to make it. And so she realized that she had done neither of the two things, cared personally or challenged directly. Then there's a great story in the book. Kim Scott herself was speaking to the executive team at Google. She worked at Google, and she reported directly to Sheryl Sandberg at that point. And she gave a presentation to the executive team, a critically important presentation. And on the way out, they're walking down the hall. She turned to Sheryl Sandberg and said, how did I do? By the way, Oprah Winfrey said in an interview once that every guest she has ever had, including people like Barack Obama, after the program, say to her one way or another, how did I do? So Kim Scott said to Sheryl Sandberg, how did I do? And Sheryl Sandberg said, you did fine, but you said too often. And so Kim Scott said, well, okay, I'll work on that, but how did I do? And Sheryl Sandberg said, you did okay, but you said too often. And Kim Scott said, okay, I get it, I'll work on the ums, but otherwise, how did I do? And Sheryl Sandberg stopped, looked her in the eye. You can almost envision her taking her by the shoulders. And she said to her, you're not listening to me. You said too often. And when you say it makes you sound stupid. And I know that you're not stupid. And so I've got money in my budget. I'm going to get you a speech coach. We're going to get rid of the ums. And so Kim Scott said that was a moment where A, she learned to listen. B, Sheryl Sandberg gave her a very direct challenge. And so she began to understand the process from that experience. And then this is just such a fun story. She described how she was walking her dog. It was a little dog, and on the sidewalks, I guess, of San Francisco, and on a leash. And the dog was chomping at the bits, trying to get away. And they were at a corner, and the dog was almost ready to jump in front of a bus. And a jogger came by, stopped, knelt down, took the dog, and sat it down and said, "Sit." And then the jogger stood up and said, "I know that you care for your dog. That dog is going to get hit by a car. You need to get that dog trained." And then he ran away. So she realized that she had not done a good job training her dog. And in one brief moment, this man cared personally for her and her dog, challenged directly, and then left. It's a great story. Okay. We're going down the list on page 9. An aside about the word radical and candor. This is really important. Radical candor. Why couldn't the book just be called Candor? Why do we need radical candor? Because we are lousy at candor. It's the same thing with Jocko Willink and Leif Babin in their book, Extreme Ownership. It didn't need to say extreme. If you're a manager, a leader, an owner of a company, a leader of a team, you take ownership for how they are going to accomplish their goals. But they had to write extreme ownership, and she has to write radical candor because we're so bad at being candid and taking ownership. So you're going to see this in the handout multiple times. The formula, radical candor equals care personally and challenge directly. Here's the next part of the formula. Make radical candor all encompassing throughout. You ask for and receive praise and criticism from those you manage. You praise and criticize those you manage. And you ask for those you manage to give praise and criticism to each other. Now, at this point, let me talk about a problem. If you're going to give a criticism, there's this sandwich idea that you give some praise and then you give the criticism and then you give some more praise. That's not a bad idea. But if you do that formula regularly, you will be perceived as someone who really is trying to criticize, and you have to work in the two praises before and after. It's a little artificial. And so this is Randy Mayu talking after reflecting on this book. I have presented this book briefing countless times. I don't think this is a formula for a conversation. I think this is a formula for a relationship. In other words, you care personally all the time really well so that people know that you care for them as a human being and for their development and success. And if you create that environment of caring for them, then when a moment comes where there needs to be criticism and tweaking, you do that with candor, and you don't have to worry about them wondering if you care for them. You've already set up that environment. So I don't think we ought to view this formula as a conversation formula, but as a relationship formula. That's what I think. Okay. Thoughts regarding problems swirling around gender differences, like vocabulary problems. Consider the word abrasive. And so Kim Scott wrote a later book. Its first version was called Just Work, not just do the work, but justice work, being just toward each other. She has a new title, and I haven't read the new version. But what she tried to do is say, sometimes, and boy, is the literature full of this, women can be perceived differently than men. And so women have an extra challenge in how to be candid without coming across in a way that is rejected. So just be aware of that. And if you really want to pursue that further, read her follow-up book. It's worth reading. It's not as good as this book. It's not as simple as this book. All right, I love this. This is a critical insight. The difference between rock stars and superstars. She says that almost all of our books on leadership and mentoring and coaching have to do with treating superstars. It's the idea this person is really good at this job, and then they learn these things. They're going to move up to the next job, and then they move those things, and they're going to move up to the next job, and they are superstars. And we treat those people as superstars. But what if you have somebody who is doing their job really well, but they don't want to move up? They're happy. They are rock stars doing their job. Years ago, I was presenting this book to the city leadership team in Round Rock, Texas. And the assistant city manager raised his hand and said, I got to tell a story. And he described a guy who worked in parks and recreation. And all he wanted to do was to keep the grounds beautiful and lush and green. He said that guy does not want to move up. He doesn't want to become a supervisor. He doesn't want to learn anything else. But boy, does he love the green, lush grass, and he takes care of it. He said that guy is a rock star. And Kim Scott says you need to give praise to your rock stars. And so figure that out and make sure that you don't, I got to say this cautiously, overbalance praising superstars who are moving up versus praising rock stars who are good at the job that they do. So figure out one by one, I'm reading here, what each wants next, because not all want to become the assistant city manager, the fire chief, the city manager. So you got to realize that. Now, here are the four possibilities. They are ruinously empathetic, or I'm reading here, obnoxiously aggressive, or manipulatively insincere, or radically candid. And if you think through those phrases, you know that you've seen bosses. You may have been this kind of supervisor or manager, someone who is ruinously empathetic, like she was with Bob. She thought he was a nice guy. She treated him nicely, but her empathy did not help him develop, and it ended up costing his job. So that's a critical factor. Obnoxiously aggressive is the jerk. And there are plenty of stories about those. If you read books that are about some of the big name leaders, Steve Jobs was a world-class jerk at one point. Bill Gates was, Elon Musk was. And so sometimes people who are good at what they do, who know they're right, can just treat people in a way that is almost inhuman. And that's why, for those of you who really want to pursue this thought, you ought to read a story about Herb Kelleher, who was the opposite of that. He was not a jerk. He got the best out of his people. He was the head of Southwest Airlines for decades, and he knew how to treat people, be kind to people, beckon their best without being a jerk to them. Manipulatively insincere is you just can't trust what they say. They're very manipulative. But what she believes we need is radical candor. Note, all of the rest are bad. It's bad to be ruinously empathetic or obnoxiously aggressive or manipulatively insincere. But the number two best option is obnoxiously aggressive. I regret to say I'm reading here from the book. If you can't be radically candid, being obnoxiously aggressive is the second best thing you can do, because that's honesty. You're telling them what they need to change. All right, page 10. Ultimately, bosses are responsible for results. We've got to remember that. That's the extreme ownership of Willink and Babbitt. Now, here are 3 areas of responsibilities that managers do have: guidance, team building, and results. Guidance, team building, and results. I think my screen is blurred, but behind me, I've got this new book by Keith Ferrazzi. It's called Never Lead Alone. He wrote Never Eat Alone. I'm just finishing my handout for Never Lead Alone, which I'm going to present for the first time this week. There are lots of good books on teams. This book, Never Lead Alone, describes how it is the responsibility of teams to lead, the whole team to lead. So guidance, team building, and results. Now, we don't have time to really go over this carefully, but I want you to know that there is no way around practicing radical candor without regular conversations. And so she says, have different kinds of meetings. Make the purpose of each different kind of meeting clear. You've got conversations one-on-one, you've got staff meetings, you've got think time, you've got, and I love this, big debate meetings. She says, have a debate meeting where you are not going to reach a decision. You sleep on the debate. And then you have big decisions meetings, and then you have all hands meetings, and you have meeting-free zones where you're not going to have any meetings. And then you've got Kanban boards or some kind of remote work on your own time meeting. And this book, Never Lead Alone, really talks about that. And then you've got walk around management by walking around, and you've got to be conscious of culture. She has a little insight on what to do in these meetings. Weekly one-to-ones, the boss, the manager does not set the agenda. Listen to your direct reports. You have meetings for debates. You have people switch sides so that they can hone their arguments. You have meetings for decision making. You even have meetings to skip down so that you skip a level down. And then you have management fix-it weeks. So that's very useful. Now, she talks about what happens when it's time to persuade the group. And so we always need to remember Aristotle. And Aristotle talked about logic, logos. This is where you show your work. Credibility, ethos, you demonstrate expertise and humility, and emotion. And it's not the speaker's emotion, the leader's emotion. It's the emotion of the team members. And so that's critical. And then she says, here are 3 conversations to have with every direct report. Conversation number 1, the life story conversation. Where did you come from? Tell me some moments that shaped you. I can't think of a major storm without thinking of when I survived a hurricane. My family did in my senior high school days. And so life story conversation. Conversation number 2, the dreams conversation. And number 3, the 18-month plan conversation. So I'm going very rapidly through these, but I want you to kind of think about all of the pieces of it wrapped around. You have these conversations to get to know somebody, to care personally for them, and then you challenge directly. Here are some miscellaneous thoughts. Think about this. Get serious about your GSD wheel. David Allen, Getting Things Done, is GTD. She tweaks it and says, get stuff done. And now you've got to be careful about this, but she says in this book to embrace hugging. And so the idea of personal touch that's not inappropriate, that's appropriate personal touch, that builds the caring personally element. So Gretchen Rubin, this is a quote from the book, who has research for everything, explains why a longer hug is more effective than a shorter one. Now, we're going to do this really fast. Turn to the front page. The front page. Why is this book worth our time? Number one, we are a beat around the bush culture. It's time to adapt the candor approach, the radical candor approach to management. Number two, managers need help knowing what activities to implement in their managing of others. This book is a very practicable, do these things manager's toolbox. And number three, people need guidance to help them develop. Take your pen and underline that. People need guidance to help them develop. This book will help turn managers into managers who can successfully provide needed guidance. Let me just say very clearly that you have some flaws, deficiencies, things that you have forgotten that you used to do. You have mistakes that you make. Your whole team and your city would appreciate it if you quit doing those things. It would be great if you had a leader who was candid with you, who would challenge you directly. And everybody around you has flaws and mistakes. And so if you had a team where everybody cared personally but challenged directly, the team would become more effective. This book would be unnecessary if people did everything right all the time without ever making a mistake. But you and I know that we're nowhere close to that ideal. Okay, if you turn to page 2, I don't have time to read hardly any of these, but I do want you to know that when you see a quote in larger font, that's my emphasis, or in bold. Look at number 4 on page 2. As you probably know, for every piece of subpar work you accept, for every missed deadline you let slip, you begin to feel resentment and then anger. You no longer just think the work is bad, you think the person is bad. This makes it harder to have an even-keeled conversation. You start to avoid talking to the person at all. There's your foundational problem of our failure to care personally and challenge directly. Well, let's turn back. We're going to wrap this up, and I'm going to turn it back to Mike Mallory. Turn back to page 11. And on page 11, you're going to see on the right bottom half the graphic, care personally, challenge directly. And so you've got to avoid the ruinous empathy. You've got to avoid the manipulative insincerity. You've got to avoid the, I can't quite read that yellow box there. Hold it, what is it? This is embarrassing. Hold on. It is the manipulatively insincere. So, and the obnoxiously aggressive. And what you want is radical candor. And so you've got a wheel here. And the wheel, you listen, you clarify, you debate, you decide, you persuade, you execute, you learn, and you repeat the cycle. If we had time, I would tell you how a failure in a rescue attempt under Jimmy Carter's presidency led to better planning that led to a successful attempt to kill Osama bin Laden when President Obama was the president. So there's an interesting pattern there of learning from your mistakes and doing better. At the top of page 11, 6 takeaways and lessons. Number 1, share serious essays and books and expect people to read. She didn't tell us this. She modeled this in this book. Number 2, wait a bit before you hit send. Read your critical email out loud to yourself. Think about, am I caring personally, but challenging directly, and then hit send. Number 3, be specific with both praise and criticism. Be specific. Number 4, personalize motivation. Remember, each person is different. Find out what this person is motivated by. That's one of the challenges of leadership, recognizing that one size does not fit all. Number 5, remember to be human, but always aim for results. Don't like them, but fail to challenge them. And number 6, and if you work independently, you will need to get a coach, and you need to learn to practice radical candor on yourself. Radical candor. Be a kick-ass boss without losing your humanity. Mike, I went 2 minutes over the time you gave me. Back to you.
Randy, that was great. I wish we had given you some more time. So next month, we're going to add on to that. Thank you so much. And, you know, I think this is one of those books. Sometimes I say, once you've heard Randy present the book, you may not need to read it. But I would say this is one of those books. If you really want to grow as a leader, you need to read this book and read the handout to make the most of it. We had some great questions that came in, and I want to address some of them. And then, Randy, I want to have you say a word about what you're going to be presenting at the Servant Leadership Conference later this month. But so one person asked, how do you work with an employee who often speaks maybe prematurely and then later has to back up? And I think the example you gave with Sheryl Sandberg and Kim Scott really speaks to this, of saying this is what happens when you say something and then we have to backtrack. It diminishes the authority and the power of your leadership. And so think before you speak and buy yourself some time and say, let me get back to you.
Yeah, and let me say to that, Mike, that is correct. The Sheryl Sandberg illustration really fits that. But you can't do it without private conversation.
Exactly.
And so you've got to have a private conversation, and you've got to have, forget the crudeness of this, the guts to get to the point. And if you don't get to the point, then it's not going to do it. I mean, if you're subtle, they're not going to get the message. People are not real great at getting subtle messages. So you got to get to the point.
And we have to, as leaders, we have to be not so dependent on people liking us that we fall into that category of being unclear, ruinous empathy, because then we're not really serving them well. And this is kind of another question that came up, which is, how do you get an employee to take full ownership of a task assigned to them? And I want to draw on my supervisor, Jennifer Fadden, our COO, because I've worked with her long enough to really benefit from, I would say, radical candor. When she will sometimes say to me, or sometimes to us as a group, let me be very clear. And she's not, hateful or anything when she says it, but she's communicating to us, here are my expectations. And I think that's very helpful. My expectations are that you will accomplish this task. Do you have any questions for me? Is there anything that you need? But let me make it clear that you're responsible and you'll be held accountable for the end product. I think that's very.
Yes. So let me add to that. A Jennifer, someone who is that good at doing that, also makes mistakes. And so what she says in the book, Radical Candor, I did not have time to cover this very well, is you've got to have an environment where you can use radical candor up the line down the line and across the line. And so if people can't have radical candor towards the Jennifer, then Jennifer's radical candor to them may not work. It's got to have radical candor up, down, and all the ways.
And I think that is preceded by the care personally.
That's right.
You know, when Jennifer speaks on those situations, that's always in the context of, I know she cares about my success. She cares about me personally. She cares about the company and so forth. So I think that's a very important thing to establish, but you have to speak clearly and your expectations. In another book, Henry Cloud says, if you are the leader, you are radically in charge. Act like it.
Yeah.
That's really the appeal there. And then one more question came up on, how do you work with an employee who didn't get the promotion that you received and now doesn't want to follow your initiatives, your direction, your assignments? And I think what you said earlier, Randy, is really applicable here. You have to have one-on-one conversations, because when someone refuses to do that, that's really not a question of, I don't understand or I disagree with the job description. That's bringing baggage over about disappointment about not getting promoted. And that's understandable, but the assignment is what the assignment is.
Yeah.
You have to state that.
And probably most of you know the stages of death, the very famous stages of death. Well, probably somebody needs to create a stages of disappointment. And so somebody didn't get the promotion, and somebody can say to them, okay, we're going to give you a month to be disappointed. You be as disappointed as you want to be. And then you get back on board and you do the job you need to do because you didn't get it. And we share your disappointment, but addressing it honestly is part of the candor. And there is an emotional component to that you can't say don't feel that way, because they do feel that way. So that's the reality.
That's a great observation. And I think just putting into practice these principles and avoiding the ruinous empathy, avoiding obnoxious aggression, avoiding manipulation, but practicing radical candor will help you with that. Randy, you're going to be speaking at the end of the month at the Servant Leadership Conference. Tell us a little bit about that book that you're going to be presenting.
Well, at this point, I would like to say to Mike that what I really lobbied for was the illustrated history of professional wrestling, but he won't let me
no.
Book. So the book that I am presenting at the Servant Leadership Conference is a terrific book. It's a second book by Liz Weissman, who wrote Multipliers on how leaders multiply the capability of their people. This follow-up book is Impact Players. And that book is about how no matter what your position is on a team, there are some people who learn to make an impact that is greater than their position. And so this is a book about how to look at your position, look at your responsibility, look at your job, and have the greatest impact on the success of the team and the organization. It's a terrific book, and I'll be presenting my book briefing on that at the Servant Leadership Conference later this month.
Yes, I'm excited about that. That's January 30th and 31st. Unfortunately, we are sold out in person, but we have a lot of space for virtual attendance. It's all day Thursday, January 30th, and then half a day from 8 a.m. to noon on Friday the 31st. You can go to our website and find the link to register for that, and would love for you and your team to join us with that. And you can email me if you have any questions about it. So Randy, thank you again for a great presentation. Thank you, Lisa Shook, for your great work behind the scenes. And to all of you that have been a part of it, Happy New Year. We're so glad to be partners with you in helping you be more successful. Wish you the best. We'll see you down the road.
Thanks, everybody.